gorgeous building.
Okay, boys and girls, let's get it started here. You were just watching a very quick summary of the Ottoman Empire. Some crazy guy that speaks a little bit too fast. But nonetheless, it's kind of interesting. The Ottoman Empire may not be as historically impactful as, let's say, the Roman Empire, right? Or the Greek Empire, the ancient Greeks. But nonetheless, it's an interesting history in our, in the world. They they held on to a very large portion of Asia, a fairly large portion of Central Europe, going, as far as Hungary, and that made them, be an important empire. They didn't last as long as the Roman Empire. They didn't last as long as the Greek Empire, but nonetheless, they had their moments. I think that what has maligned the Ottoman Empire to a great degree is the fact that they were Muslims, and that has not been really very much acceptable to the European Christian eye, right? In other words, Europe being mainly a Christian culture or part of the world, they always looked at the Ottoman Empire with fear. They looked at the Ottoman Empire with some degree of doubt, some degree of suspicion, and for good reason. Just like the Christians did, trying to convert people, sometimes through force. The Ottoman Empire did the same thing with Islam, with trying to convert people through the sword, and forcing their religion on the vast areas that they were able to touch, that they were able to influence, and of course, to a Christian, Christians saw the Ottoman Empire and Islam as heathens in many ways, as a religion and a culture that really did not fit the the way of life, the Christian values, and all of that stuff. And there was always tension. Now, some people might say that there was more religious freedom on the Christian side than there was on the Islamic side, but that's not true. Both Christians and Muslim worlds were really not very tolerant of other religions. And all we have to do is look at the Inquisition. And I don't know whether you've ever heard of that term, the Inquisition. But the Inquisition was a movement to purge from the Christian world, people that did not adhere to Christian values. And the Inquisition was very strong throughout the southern part of Europe, not as strong towards the northern part of Europe, because the northern part of Europe, like England and Germany and some of those, and further north into the Scandinavian countries, had become, had turned to Protestantism. And Protestantism was stood at the opposite end of Catholicism, in that Martin Luther wrote about the evils of Catholicism, and this new branch of the Christian church kind of came up, evolved. But in the southern part of Europe, throughout Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, around there, where Catholicism was still very strong, the Inquisition was quite brutal. They were quite brutal in throwing non-believers or people that they thought were not adhering to Christian values, throwing them in jail, and really, I mean, in many cases, burning them at the stake. Now, in the Ottoman Empire, there are some historians that want to claim, and I think erroneously, and not only do I think erroneously, but most historians think erroneously, that the Muslims allowed or created a system of coexistence with Christians. And that's not true. They allowed Christians to live there, but the Christians had less rights. They didn't have equal rights with the Muslims. The Muslims always had the upper hand. And not to mention the fact that at times there was even some degree of antagonism going on between the Muslims and the Christians, and in which case the Christians always lost. They always lost that argument. So anyway, so let's look back over here a little bit, and let's see what we covered last time. And last time we covered, I tried to cover with you as much as I could on Islam, because the Ottoman Empire, you cannot understand the Ottoman Empire unless you understand Islam, unless you understand Muslims. The Ottoman Empire considered the caliphs, the leaders of the Ottoman Empire, considered themselves and consider the empire to be the protector of Islam. In other words, they wanted to make sure that Islam continued to be and continued to grow, right? Islam is a proselyting religion. And here's a big word for you, but it's one that you need to know. Proselyting means missionary, meaning that a proselyting religion is a religion that goes out to convert people to their religion. Unlike, let's say, the Hindus, they don't care. If you're not a Hindu, they don't care. They say, okay, that's fine. Don't be a Hindu. We don't really care. The Buddhist, you don't want to be a Buddhist? Go jump in the lake. We don't care, right? even the Hebrews, the Jews, to some degrees, they say, we don't care if you don't want to be Jewish. That's your problem. In fact, we don't want you to be Jewish. In order to be Jewish, there's a certain culture that goes into being Jewish, and you're either Jewish or you're not Jewish. And they're not going to go out trying to convert you. They're not going to go out trying to convince you to become a Jew. In fact, a lot of people actually complain that Jews don't want other people being Jews. They just want themselves. They're very internalized, right? They're very isolated and internalized from the rest of the world. Not Christianity, not Islam. Christianity is a proselyting religion. There are many Christian sects that go out. They've gone to China to try to convert people into Christianity. They've gone into other parts of the world to try to convert those people into Christianity, in the Philippines, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America. The Spaniards went to Latin America. Columbus went to Latin America with Christian values. And later, the follow-up trips of Columbus and other conquistadors, they brought with them priests. And the priests, they wanted to convert the Indians, the indigenous population that was in the Americas, convert them into Christianity. They wanted to save them, save their souls. Islam, kind of the same way. So the two are proselyting, the others, maybe not quite so much. In fact, not at all. So you have to understand that. You have to understand the important part that Islam played in what the Ottoman Empire was, and their motivation for existing and for going into other parts of the world. Religion and power, they go together. Basically, unfortunately, but that is the truth. And why does religion and power go together? Because an unknown God is a big motivator for people. And if you're a leader and you can motivate people to believe in God, you can get them to do anything you want. And what does a leader that seeks power wants to do? To get the people under him to do whatever he says. And it is very easy to go up to go to the masses and say, you're going to go to hell if you don't do this, and if you go to hell, God forbid your soul, because your soul is going to hang over there in the pits of hell for eternity. And that's a scary thought. That idea is very, very scary. And to someone like me, a cynic like me, who just doesn't believe in religion, I see, people like the Prophet Muhammad as just someone seeking power. And he understood. He was smart enough, even though he was not literate. He didn't know how to write or read, but he understood. He was smart enough, in spite of the fact that he did not know how to write or read. He was smart enough to understand that if he told people that he spoke to the angel Gabriel in some cave somewhere, and the angel Gabriel told them, gave him words to pass on to people, he knew that the followers, the people that believed him, would follow him to the ends of the earth, and they would do whatever the heck he wanted. And if they did whatever the heck he wanted, that meant he would have money, and that meant he would have many wives, and that meant he could go wherever he wanted to go. And that's power. That's power, right? That's the pure definition of power. So, religion and power, they go together. They go together. Look at the Pope, right? Look at the Pope. The Pope sits there in a throne, and millions of people fall to their knees at the Pope. He's nothing but a man, you know. He's got a big ring in his finger and he puts out his big ring and people are supposed to kiss it. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's true, right? So the believers, they go and they kiss his ring. And whatever he says, people hang on every word that the Pope says. Come on, give me a break. You know, I'll tell you who I hang on to everything that he's dead now, but he said, Albert Einstein. That's the guy, because science is my religion. Science is my religion. That's my religion. So whatever Einstein said, I pay attention. You know, I pay attention. Um, whatever Charles Darwin said, I pay attention. You know, I don't care what the Pope says. I don't care what some caliph says in some Muslim land. You know, I don't care what Joseph Smith says inside of the Mormon church. I don't care. Meaningless to me. It's totally meaningless. Now, Charles Darwin, that's a different story. There's a prophet for you. There's a guy. Einstein, there's a guy. Oppenheimer, there's a guy. Right? There's a guy. So anyway, but we must understand history. We must understand, we must learn history in order to know what happened, because what happened affects what's going on today. So by knowing history, we understand what's going on today, and it allows us to plan for the future, because we know that history repeats itself in many ways. Why? Because history is created by men, and men, and men don't change. Humans don't change. Humans are as stupid today as they were 1,000 years ago. Humans are as stupid today as they were 1,000 years ago. No difference. Today, we got all the advancement, the computers, the cell phones, but we're still making the same mistakes that our ancestors made 1,000 years ago. So humans don't change, and for that reason, history will repeat itself, because humans are the ones that drive history. Anyway, so if you have any questions, scream out, send me a text, or send me a chat, but don't stay quiet. Don't stay quiet. Say something. Tell me what you got in mind. Tell me what kind of questions you have, whether it's a complaint or whether it's whatever the heck you want to do, because history is important, and this particular period of history is important. All right. This affects us all, whether you're from Southeast Asia, or whether you're from Scandinavia, or whether you're from Asia or Asia Minor, or, you know, doesn't make any difference. These people influenced the world greatly, and that influence, we're still living through a lot of that influence today. Now, so let's talk a little bit more. Let's talk about Muslim holidays. We're going to be finished with this whole Muslim thing pretty soon. Let me see. I think yeah, that's right. We only have a couple of slides, and then we'll finish with Islam as a religion, and then we'll start looking at the history itself. You know, how the Ottoman Empire started and things like that. Now, let me give you a word of warning, which I think, you know, which I gave you during my lecture of the Roman Empire. All of these histories are long, and we only have a very limited amount of time to discuss to discuss these empires. So I am providing you with a PowerPoint presentation that goes into detail. It goes into a lot of detail about the Ottoman Empire, as well as a lot of detail about the Roman Empire. And when we do ancient Greece, it'll be the same. And when we do Constantinople or the Byzantine Empire, it'll be the same. The Holy Roman Empire will be the same. So you can read through it, but during this time, I can only touch on highlights. I will show you the slides, which has a lot of presentation, a lot of information in them, but I will point out the things that are important for you to know. And that's because we just don't have the time. We don't have enough time to go deep into it. And as I've told you, there are people out there that have got PhDs, degrees, and who write books about these empires. And obviously we can't cover it all in 4, 5, 10 days or whatever. 5 hours or 4 hours or something like that. It's impossible. It's just impossible. But you get a taste. You get a taste of what's going on, so that when you see the name Ottoman Empire, these images pop into your mind and you say, oh yeah, well, I know what the heck is going on. And by the way, 3 days ago started Ramadan right here. You see this word right here, Ramadan? It started 3 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. Just started the other day. And it so happens that I have a very good friend, a friend who is a tennis player. And I don't know whether you know it, I'm a tennis player. I play a lot of tennis. I've been playing tennis since I was, 12 or 13 years old. And I've been playing all my life. And this guy he used to be a professional tennis player. He's older, but he's in fact right now he's a tennis teacher, and I'm a good friend of his. We will go out to lunch and all this stuff all the time. And he started celebrating Ramadan 3 days ago, and I know because I called him up on the phone and I said, hey, his name is Abdullah. Abdullah is a very Muslim name. It's kind of like saying John for the Christians, right? So I said, hey, Abdullah, let's go out to lunch. Oh, no, I can't. Ramadan started 3 days ago. And then Ramadan is a holy month in which they fast. They have to fast. They can't eat when the sun is up. They can only eat when the sun goes down. Crazy, right? Crazy. But, religions are crazy. Religions are crazy. Who does God care whether you eat during the daytime or not? So it really doesn't make any difference. But he has to fast for 30 days. He cannot eat the moment the sun goes up. So if he gets up early in the morning before the sun goes up, he can have breakfast. But the moment the sun goes up, he cannot drink and he cannot eat. Now, people that are sick, older people, they get a reprieve. They can eat, right? But they have to be sick. They have to be sick, or older people, someone who is 80 or something like that, and they can't stay all day without eating. So he can eat when it's dark, early in the morning, and then he's got to go from, let's say the sun goes up at 7 o'clock in the morning. He cannot touch anything, put anything in his mouth until the sun goes down at whatever time, 8. So he's got 13 hours that he cannot eat anything. So anyway, these are some, there are others, Muslim holidays. The Eid al-Adha, which celebrates the prophet Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son for Allah. You know, Abraham is in the Bible, and like I told you, the Quran takes from the Bible a little bit, right? Some of the stories in the Quran parallel the stories from the Bible. Um, Eid al-Fitr, which marks the end of Ramadan, is which is the Islamic holy month of fasting. You got Ramadan, of course. Muslims also celebrate other holidays, such as the Islamic New Year and the birth of Muhammad. So they celebrate. They have their celebrations, just like every other religion. Uh, Now, Islam today, in recent years, Islam's supposed association with terrorism and mass murder has sparked a political debate in many countries. The controversial term radical Islam has become a well known label to describe the religion's connection to acts of violence. And this is a reality. This is a reality that it is a religion that uh, violence is a part of it, unfortunately. While some Muslims use their faith to justify terrorism, the vast majority, they do not. In fact, Muslims are frequently victims of violence themselves. Some of the violence that some of these Muslims engage in affect um, other Muslims. Recent surveys have found that in countries with high Muslim populations, the majority of Muslims have overwhelmingly negative views of terrorist groups like ISIS. And again, I don't know whether you read the news and stuff like that, but you might want to read about ISIS, ISIS, because they're a group that wants to create a caliphate. They want to create a Muslim country, a very strict Muslim country in the Middle East. In other words, they want to wipe out parts of Iraq, they want to wipe out parts of Iran, and they want to take over that area, and they want to make it a very strict religious country. While Muslims aim to clear up misconceptions about their faith, the religion continues to spread rapidly. It is still a rapidly spreading religion. Today, Islam is the world's fastest growing religion. Experts predict Islam will surpass Christianity as the largest religion by the end of the century. So, so by the time 2100 comes in, we're at 2021 right now. So in another 80 or 90 years, maybe some of us are alive, maybe some of us are not. Uh, but by then, it's probably going to surpass Christianity, probably. Nobody really knows because we don't know what's going to happen exactly. We can only predict a little bit. But heck, we could have a nuclear war, and then, that solves a lot of problems, right? Now, I'm providing you here with a glossary. This is part of the all the information that I'm giving you with this PowerPoint. And these PowerPoints that I gave you, the one about the Roman Empire and this one here is for your reference, is for you to keep it in your file somewhere. And if you ever have to do a book report or something like that, you should go in there and look through it. I don't want to go into each and every one of the terminologies here about who is who and what is what, but this gives you a quick view at some of the things in case you hear some of these names. And one of the things that you have to understand about human endeavor and human history is that for some reason or another, we've been fighting wars our entire lives. It makes us wonder if we're ever going to reach a point of peace in the world, where people just get along. Um, and that's obvious here. The Battle of Nicopolis, the Battle of Varna, you know, the Ghazi warrior. These are all terms that, if you want to read through them, uh, be my guest. In some cases, entries of this glossary just tells you the name of somebody. Mehmet the second, the conqueror. He was very impactful uh, character. That lived in the 1400s. Uh, Islam, stuff like that. The Mongols or the Mongol Empire. Well, you should know about the Mongols. Um, Inner and Outer Mongolia. Inner Mongolia, it's part of China. Outer Mongolia right now is an independent country. But they say, that a lot of the Islamic religion was born out of this area. Um, so the way things evolved. So it gives you a little bit uh, of a definition. Ottoman Turks, things like that. So you know, so make sure you. And here's a little bit more what a sultan is. This is a term that you're gonna hear. You're gonna hear the word sultan, and you're gonna hear the word sultanate. A harem, the shah, things like that. Um, a sultan is a Muslim leader, a Muslim king. The term is distinct from king, despite both referring to a ruler, to a sovereign ruler. The use of sultan is restricted to Muslim countries only, where the title carries religious significance, contrasting the more secular king, which is used in both Muslim and non-Muslim countries. So the difference between a sultan and Henry VIII in England is that a sultan has a religious connotation. A sultan is one of the many protectors of Islam. Henry VIII, he was secular. Secular meaning that he believed in God, he believed in the church to some degree, because, as you know, he kicked out the church out of England when he wanted to divorce his many wives, and the Pope did not want him to. And he said, to heck with it. I'm not going to be a Catholic anymore. I'm going to create a church in England. It's going to be the Church of England. So he wasn't the protectorate of anybody. So we call someone like Henry VIII a secular meaning not aligned with any religion, right? Not aligned, or aligned in his own way, so to speak, right? Which was the case of Henry VIII. So there's a big difference between Mamat and Henry VIII. Sultanate, a feminine form of a sultan, used by Westerners in sultana or sultana. A harem, um, you know, uh, these sultans and a lot of the people that had power and had money, because if you were poor, you weren't going to be able to do this. Uh, but the people that were able to afford multiple wives, they did it. And a sultan would have a harem, and a harem is a household where there are many women living in it, and they are the wives of one person, right? Uh, the sultans often had harems where the women counted in the hundreds. Um, and we can look it up, but if I remember correctly, there were some harems with 150, 170 wives. and concubines. Concubine is a woman who provides the sultan with children, right? She gets pregnant by the sultan or the head of the household without being officially married to him, right? That's what the word concubine means. So here would be someone who, and let's face it, if you were a farmer and you're herding sheep, out in a rural area, and you make enough money just to subsist, you're not going to have a bunch of women in your house because you got to feed them. So it's got to be someone that's got, it's got the money, right? Uh, it's got to be someone that's got the money. But the head of the household, if he had enough money, he could have multiple women. I used to do a lot of traveling through the Middle East. And I've been to Turkey and been to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and I've seen men with multiple wives, and in Dubai, I saw Saudis, people that were, guys that were from Saudi Arabia, and they traveled to Dubai. Dubai is kind of like a vacation spot. And they would bring their wives. And in Saudi Arabia, 3 wives is not uncommon. So this guy would be walking around. He'd have 3 women behind him. Now, how can he afford flights for 3 women? Bring them to Dubai and, have them lodged at an expensive hotel where he's got to get a room for each one of the wives, unless he had money, So harem was not for, it's not for someone who wasn't rich. A Shah was as the title of a king in Iran. So all of these names, it's good for you to understand what they mean. And the Grand Vizier is kind of like second in command in the Sultanate, in this case, in the Ottoman Empire. Anyway, so let's move on. The Ottoman Empire was a state that controlled much of southeastern Europe, Western Asia, and northern Africa between the 14th and early 20th century. Right. So around the 1400s, and the early part of the 20th century, the 1900s, the Ottoman Empire was an entity, was an empire. It was founded at the end of the 13th century in northwest Anatolia. And just so that because the word Anatolia, even when you read, or the name Anatolia, even when you read about Roman history, you read about the Roman Empire. You read about Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and all that stuff. You will come across Anatolia. There was an area called the Roman Anatolia because there was an area where the Romans had gone in and conquered. And I'm going to give you a quick look at Anatolia. This is Anatolia right here. And if you look, here's Egypt, right? This is Egypt. This is the Suez Canal, right? This is Europe over here. This is Greece, right? This is Greece. As you cross this isthmus, I-T-H-M-U-S, isthmus. An isthmus is a strip of land that has water on either side, on both sides, right? So as you cross this isthmus here, you cross over what is today Istanbul, which back in those days was called Constantinople. And once you cross over the top of Istanbul, you enter Europe. You enter Europe. So right at this break right here, going that way is Europe. You got Eastern Europe up to the right. You got Central Europe straight ahead. And if you make a sharp left hand, you come into Western, what we would consider to be Western Europe. So this is Anatolia, this whole region right here. Now, the Romans were on the other side of Thebes, on the other side of Greece, so they weren't very far away. And the Romans had taken over all of this area here, including Egypt, Carthage, all of that stuff, if you remember from when we were discussing that. So the Romans had, you know, a great deal of this area right here. So Anatolia was an important part of the territory that they held. This is Anatolia. And Anatolia is today what we call Turkey. Turkey. Turkey is this plus a little piece right here, right? Turkey, Istanbul is not part of Anatolia. Istanbul is something else. And if you were watching the video, you know, the guy said the word Istanbul came from a Turkish word that meant going to the city. You know, so when you hear the word Istanbul, something similar meant in the Turkish language of the day that meant going to the city. And what that meant was that you would cross over from Anatolia into Istanbul, and then you were in the city, because over here you're out in the middle of nowhere. You know, well, today, you know, there are a lot of cities here, obviously, but you know, back in those days, it was a little bit more sparse. It was founded at the end of the 13th century in northwestern Anatolia in the town of Sogut, which is modern-day Bilecik province, by the Turkoman tribal leader Osman I. And here we have a picture of Osman I. And that is one name that you should remember, Osman. And Osman was, you know, when etymology, the word etymology means the origin of words, right? The origin of words, etymology. Remember that word, because you will see that eti with a Y, etymology, right? The word etymology has to do with the origin of words. And the word Ottoman comes from the word Osman, believe it or not. So the word Osman, when you anglicize it, when you take this guy's name and you say it in English very fast, right? It sort of becomes Ottoman. And that's where the word Ottoman, the Ottoman Empire, came from, because it originated with this fine looking gentleman right here, right? Osman created the word Ottoman. After 1354, the Ottomans crossed into Europe, and with the conquest of the Balkans, the Ottoman Belek was transformed into a transcontinental empire. The Ottomans ended the Byzantine Empire with the 1453 conquest of Constantinople by Mehmed the Conqueror. All right. So Again, going back, and remember that I told you that we weren't, in the Roman Empire or the Roman history that we were discussing. I wasn't going to go too deeply into the emperors that came after Constantine, and the reason why I don't want to do that. Number one, time. We don't really have the time to go deep into that, but also because I want to tie that to the Holy Roman Empire um, that that was going on around that period of time. Both of those need to be studied together, or at least, study that period of the Roman Empire in 4 weeks, and then move on to the Holy Roman Empire the other 4 weeks, so that you understand the mentality of the people around that time, right? The mentality of the people. Um, the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, uh, which was called the Byzantine Empire, was run by Christians that originated from Rome. North of that, the Holy Roman Empire was run by a character by the name of Charlemagne. Um, so these are two entirely different, or at least started by that character named Charlemagne. So these are two periods of time that we need to study, beside, outside of the study that we did on the Roman Empire, I should say. Um, but anyway, the the people, the emperors that followed Constantine, who were Christians and who created or who centered the Eastern Roman capital in Istanbul, in what is today Istanbul. And back then they called it Constantinople. They called it Constantinople after Constantine, right? After Emperor Constantine, who was the first emperor of Rome to accept Christianity, who turned the Roman Empire into a Christian entity, into a Christian empire, right? So Istanbul was called Constantinople. That empire was called the Byzantine Empire. And these guys, they wanted it. They wanted to overrun it, and they wanted to take over it. They were That empire was a competing empire, and the Ottoman, uh, they wanted it, and they did. They took it. They overran it. They conquered it. They turned Constantinople into Istanbul, which, remember, I said it means going to the city. And they kept on going. And they kept on going beyond that. Once they took over Constantinople, there was no stopping them. They kept on going, and they went that direction. And then they took over a large portion of Central Europe, a large portion of Central Europe. Again, as I say, let me repeat myself. If you have any questions, uh, go ahead, ask them. Don't be shy. I understand all of these things can be a little bit complicated. This history represents a lot of new words to a lot of people, right? When I was a youngster, I used to hear the word Byzantine. Oh, what the hell is Byzantine? Byzantine kind of reminds me of some medicine. Maybe it's some sort of ointment that people put on a leg or something like that when they hurt a muscle. If you're out playing tennis and you pull a muscle, you go out and you buy Byzantine at a grocery store, and you rub it on your leg, and your leg feels better. That's what I thought Byzantine meant. So these are all words that can be a little confusing to people who have never really come across them. These names, in other words. So if you're going to ask something, please go ahead and ask. Don't be afraid. Uh, this is a topographical map of Constantinople during the Byzantine period. So this was what today is Istanbul. Back when here, in fact, right here, there is a big old church right in this tip of Constantinople, where uh, the leader of the Byzantine Empire, which was a Roman uh, leftover or a Roman Empire, a Christian Catholic Roman Empire. This is where it was. And so this is a map. So remember, Byzantine was the Christian Empire. The Ottoman was the Muslim Empire that laid on the other side of this stretch of water here, because Europe begins right here. You know, from here on in is Europe. Under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, Ottoman Empire marked the peak of its power and prosperity, as well as the highest development of its government, social, and economic system. At the beginning of the 17th century, the empire contained 32 provinces and numerous vassal states. A vassal state is a state that answers to you, right? A vassal state is either a little country or a little nation or a little state that answers to one major state. Some of these were later absorbed into the Ottoman Empire, while others were granted various types of autonomy over the course of centuries. You know, so some of them kept their autonomy, kept their own leadership. Some of them were taken into the Ottoman Empire, which is very typical. This is very typical of empires. With Constantinople, modern day, which is modern day Istanbul, and you can see it right here. This is, you know, this is Istanbul right here. It's a very pretty city. I've flown into this area, you know, with in a passenger plane, and there's an airport up here, and I've come like this, right over the top, and then the plane lines up with a runway and goes in there. So I've seen this little peninsula jut out, you know, that jets out into this part of the ocean. So you're looking at it. Very pretty. Very interesting city, Istanbul. As its capital and control of islands around the Mediterranean basin, the Ottoman Empire was at the center of interactions between the Eastern and Western worlds for 6 centuries, 600 years. Now, again, you know, I compare that, right? Contrast that with the Roman Empire that was almost 3 times the length of time, right? You know, Roman Empire was, I don't know, 1400 years or more. This is only 600 years that this empire lasted. Now, yeah, it's a long time, no doubt about it. It's a long time. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not as long as some of the other empires. While the empire was once thought to have entered a period of decline following the death of Suleiman the Magnificent, this view is no longer supported by the majority of academic historians. Whenever a leader dies, sometimes an empire or a country, and I'm talking about a strong leader, I'm not talking about the kind of leaders that Western democracies have that come in and out all the time. You know, if Joe Biden dies today, you know, we just get another leader. But back in those days, you know, a leader would be strong enough that once he died, there was always a little bit of a, you know, a period of adjustment to go through. The empire continued to maintain a flexible and strong economy, society and military throughout the 17th and for much of the 18th century. However, during a long period of peace from 1740 to 1768, the Ottoman military system fell behind that of other European rivals, the Habsburg and Russian empires. Habsburg, up through the northern part of Europe, the northwestern part of Europe, and then of course the Russian Empire, which is to the east, and that is true. Um, Back and even today, I mean, the military, some militaries they gain strength, some of them lose strength. Uh, Technology was very crucial, very important to military, as it is today. And if a strong leader was not maintaining a sense of investment into the military, they could fall behind. And if a leader dies, then they can fall behind. The Ottomans consequently suffered severe military defeats in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, which prompted them to initiate a comprehensive process of reform and modernization known as the Tasimat. Thus, over the course of the 19th century, the Ottoman state became vastly more powerful and organized, despite suffering further territorial losses, especially in the Balkans, where a number of new states emerged. So they expanded, they contracted, they lost a little bit, they expanded again, they contracted again. This is very typical of what happens to an empire. And I'm trying to give you a very broad sense of what was going on. This is basically the Ottoman Empire with areas that they took over during the latter part of their, well, I wouldn't say latter, but middle part of their existence. Around the 1900s, they managed to make it well into Europe and touching part of the Russian Empire. They took over Serbia. And again, these are countries that you must read a little bit about on your own when you get a chance, because recently in Sarajevo, Serbia, Croatia, we had a war. We had a war going back around the 1990s, the late 1990s, during the time that Bill Clinton was the president of the United States. Some leaders, as this country was called Yugoslavia at one time, and it was called Yugoslavia during, let me point it out right over here, during the Soviet period. After the Second World War, the Soviets moved westerly and they consolidated some of these areas and they created countries. And they took Serbia, Herzegovina, Sarajevo, Croatia, and they created a country, and they called it Yugoslavia. Yugo, like that. Sorry for the lousy handwriting. Yugoslavia. My God, what a terrible looking name. Yugoslavia. So the problem with Yugoslavia was that there were at least 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 distinct cultures. People that spoke different languages, people that had different customs. One guy liked to eat one thing, the other guy liked to eat the other something else. One guy dressed one way, the other guy dressed the other way, and they didn't like each other for years. For something like 70 years, they coexisted, but poorly. because they really didn't like each other. And then all of a sudden, the Soviet Union collapses and they want to separate. They have a big meeting and they say, well, you know, we don't want to live, Croatians don't want to live with the Serbians. We're totally different from the Serbians. So this country, Yugoslavia, broke up into 5 little countries. Montenegro, let me see, Montenegro, uh, 5 countries. And but now that they broke up, at that initial period of them breaking up, parts of that country are Muslim. They're still Muslim, and this was the real problem. The real problem was that Croatia, which is Muslim, was living next to Serbia, which is Christian, and they just really did not like each other. And all of a sudden, you get some generals that they decide they want to exterminate, literally, I'm not kidding you, exterminate Muslims. So they go out and they start killing Muslims in mass. They start committing genocide in mass. And the world is totally outraged. And then the European Union, Canada, the United States, they had to jump in and bring peacekeeping forces into this area to, you know, to bring peace and to stop the genocide. So we had, up to recently, we had issues. We had issues because the Muslims, as they moved in this way, they converted. They converted a lot of people. They converted a lot of people in Yugoslavia. There's a little country here. Forgot the name of it, but they're like 97% Muslim. So there are some little countries in this region that still today have a very large Muslim population. If you ever go to Hungary and you go to Budapest, I don't know whether you know that the city Budapest is comprised of 2 cities, Buda and Pest. Budapest. Buda is where the royals lived, on the other, across the river, across the Danube. The Danube runs right through the middle. And Pest is on the other side, and that's where the working people lived. So if you ever go to Budapest and you go to the old residence of the monarchs, you know, it has now become a museum. You can go there and look at the walls. The walls are lined with kings and monarchs, you know, leaders. And you start, you know, way, way back, you know, maybe 300 BCE or something like that. And then you see them, and you see them one right after the other. And then all of a sudden, and you see the dates, you know, below each portrait, it'll say, you know, King Alexis the 7th or something, you know, whatever. And then the other one and the other one and the other one. And then all of a sudden you get around the 14 and 1500s and you start seeing Muslims. You start seeing Turkish leaders, right? You no longer see a king or a monarch of some kind. You know, you begin to see a sultan, and the guy's dressed in a sultan outfit, and then it stops. So then it goes for like, I don't know, maybe 300 years, and then boom, it stops, and then you start seeing, you know, Christian leaders again, and then it stops because the monarchy left. Hungary after the takeover of the Soviet Union, right? Um, so you see it right there in the walls at the residence of the monarchs, at the residence of the kings. Very interesting. Um, if you ever travel through that region, make sure you go to that museum. It's a very interesting museum. I got a kick out of it. I got a kick out of it because I know a little bit about the history, but not that much. And as I'm walking down the halls, I'm seeing and I'm noticing the changes, immediate changes, very sudden changes. You're going from a guy that, he looks European, um, to a guy who looks like a sultan, like Mohammed. So that's interesting. And that sort of, that which the Ottomans did by going over here and taking over had a lasting impact. Uh, the lasting impact is that there's still frictions uh, here between areas that are Muslim and areas that are Christian. Those frictions, they're never going to leave. But anyway, they pushed this way. They pushed east. They pushed west into Egypt. They took over Egypt. The Egyptian, what was once the Egyptian Empire, which uh, was run by the Greeks, starting with Alexander the Great around 300 uh, before Christ, BC. And then the Romans took over, and then it became a Roman Empire uh, around the 14 or the 1500, well, a little later actually, uh, became an Ottoman area. Uh, and when you look at the area that they cover, it's very similar, kind of like the opposite side of the coin of what the Romans held, because the Romans held kind of like this over here. The Romans went like this, actually further up that way, and they came over here and they had all of this, right? And they went like this and like this, like that. So the Romans had a little larger area. They were never really able to cover everything that the Romans did, but they covered, they covered quite a bit. They covered, a great deal. So anyway, so that further gives you a little bit more understanding of what went on around that time. Again, as I say, remember, don't feel bad that you don't quite get everything in detail. It's too big, the this lesson. It's just way too big. We can only pick at things so that you can understand the important points of what's going on. I'm going to stop right here. It's already 7 minutes after the time that we normally stop. But I would like to open the floor for a little while. We got another 2 or 3 minutes. If you have any questions, any comments, if you want to clarify some of the things that we talked about, but it's simple. This is, if you were to consider civilization to be a coin, and here you have some leader that appears in a coin. They always put leaders in coins, right? This is one side of the coin. And then on the other side of the coin, you have another leader, right? Like that. The Ottoman Empire is the other side of the insanity coin of the Roman Empire. Both empires were power crazy. Both empires wanted to take over more land than they deserved. Both empires uh, did good and did bad, like always. But the Ottoman Empire is the other side, is the continuation, in a way, within the grand scheme of the stupidity that mankind has gotten involved in, of the other side of the Roman Empire. If you're going to understand that, if you're going to understand what I'm talking about, I've always seen the Ottoman Empire as a pretty much a catastrophe, just like the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire did other things that were pretty good, but still they created a lot of hardship. And the Ottomans did the same thing. Anyway, so any questions? Any questions whatsoever? Good, bad, in between. Um, what I can tell you is that if you ever get a chance to travel to this region, take it, do it. Very interesting. Very interesting region. Uh, Beautiful cities. End of second class. Beautiful cities. Istanbul is really a very interesting city. So, if there are no more questions, guess what I am going to say? And that is, see you later, alligator.
See you later.